What's the drawing question I need to stop asking? How about, how do I draw trees? Or it could be, how do I draw cars? Or it could be, how do I draw faces? Might be, how do I draw architecture? Or really, how do I draw any particular thing at all? Now, this question usually comes from us feeling that there's a certain subject or subjects in our drawings that aren't as strong, don't look as good as the other things. So what can often happen then is I start to look out for how other people have drawn these subjects that give me so much difficulty. And that's a reasonable thing to do. In fact, I'd say it's a helpful thing to do. The problem is that what can easily happen is that, let's say I find someone who draws trees and I think, these trees look great. I'd like my trees to look like these trees. Let me look really closely at the marks they've used to create the trees that look so good. And now let me try and remember these marks or copy these marks to draw my trees, because clearly this is the way we draw good trees, or good faces, or good skies, or good whatever the area is that's giving me trouble. But my problem is that when I do my next drawing where I need, say, trees, and I try and use those marks, I try and copy those marks in some way to create my tree, well, it just doesn't look very good. It doesn't seem to have the same place in my drawing that I had in the other drawing. And I would say the main reason why my tree, when I've tried to remember and use the marks that I've come across in someone else's drawing, or perhaps in a how to draw video, how to draw trees video, the problem is in that original drawing where I saw these marks, where I got these marks, and I'm remembering or copying these marks from, they were for a particular tree. They were for a particular type of tree. They were for a particular size of tree. They were for a tree with particular sized leaves. They were for a tree where the leaves were distributed in a particular way. They were for a tree where the leaves were attached to the twigs in a particular way. They were for a tree where the bunches of leaves grouped together to form a canopy or canopies in a particular way. They were leaves of a particular colour. They were for a tree that we were viewing from a particular angle. They were for a tree we were viewing from a particular distance. They were for a tree that was in particular light or shade. They were for a tree where the overall scene had particular values and particular marks used for the other things. They were for a tree that was in a particular relationship to the focal point of the drawing, or they were the focal point of the drawing. They were for a tree that was drawn with a particular pen type and nib size. All of these things contributed to the effectiveness of the tree that caught my attention as working really effectively in a drawing. And I hope this has started you thinking that if there's no one way to see a tree, if there's no one tree to draw, then there is no one way to draw a tree. There is no one set of marks that will deliver the treeness that I need in the drawing that's in front of me, in the particular tree I need to draw, playing a particular role in the scene that I'm drawing. It is a fundamental mistake to think that there are certain marks drawn in a certain way to create a certain pattern that produces a tree. It's in fact a much more creative process than a cut and paste approach, which in some ways is what this really is. I appreciate it may seem odd for someone to say there is no one way to draw a tree, there is no this is how you draw a tree, from someone who's produced so many how to draw a tree videos. But I think one of the real problems with this approach, this reducing drawing to a simplistic how do I draw this or that, is that it gets me focused on the wrong thing. It gets me focused on finding the way, the key the technique for putting marks that produce this subject or that subject, instead of focusing on how do I draw? What is the drawing process? The importance of this question, of my understanding of the drawing process for me and for the way I want to draw, was something I raised in my last video. So if you're interested a little bit more on the implications of this question, you might like to look at that. But the real question when I'm not sure of how to draw this tree is not how do you draw trees, not what's the pattern that will look like a tree, but how do I draw? How do I understand that process? And then how do I apply it, not to a tree, but to this tree? And when my emphasis is always, when my focus is always on the big picture of what is drawing and how does that understanding work for this subject, I'm actually being educated, I'm actually being equipped to now apply that to any subject, including this tree. So if I'm actually thinking there's a right way of creating marks to draw a tree, and I spend my time when I'm drawing trying to apply those marks in a particular case, the problem is I'm not focusing where I believe we need to focus. I've stopped looking at the particular tree in my reference. I've stopped looking at all those issues about leaves and branches and branch shapes and canopy shapes and all that I mentioned before, and how that applies to this particular tree, because I'm rushing ahead to try and just put the right marks that will magically create a tree on the paper. I've stopped focusing on this particular tree, not just as a standalone item, but as a part of a scene, and how the most appropriate marks to use may change depending whether this tree is closer or further back, or whether it's to the side, or whether it's right in the middle as the star event. And I've stopped focusing on, in my imagination, how this drawing may look at the end. I've stopped, if you like, having a trial run in my brain of the sort of marks that might create the effect that I need for this tree under these conditions in this position for this particular drawing. These are all the things that need to come together for me to draw a tree that truly works in my scene. Drawing is far more creative than cutting and pasting certain marks for certain objects. And if my focus is on trying to discover the magic marks for a tree or a face, the magic way to draw these things as if there is only one way, then I'm being distracted down a path and putting my energy and my drawing time into a path that's not going to be able to give me the sorts of drawings that I've seen other people do and that I aspire to do. For me, one of the most important parts of my drawing process is to consider the question, how do I translate the visual impression of the scene that I've got in a photo in front of me or even in my mind onto the paper? Because I can't copy it. It's a photo. If I'm going for sameness, well, there's no way with a black fine liner pen I can copy something precisely that's made up of, I don't know, hundreds of thousands of pixels of 3 different colored inks. So in fact, I'm going to be changing one visual impression into a different visual expression, but that in some way is going to say the same thing, or will say the same thing but with the changes I deliberately want to introduce into it. Now, knowing a wide range of marks that can be used in a wide range of ways and combined with other marks for a wide range of effects is going to be tremendously helpful in drawing any subject, because it gives me more marks that can be combined in more ways to create a wider range of visual effect. But it doesn't tell me which marks are going to work in which combination to best create the effect I need in this particular drawing. It's my understanding of the overall creative process that leads me to that place. It's my understanding that, the way I see it, I'm doing translation work here from a visual reality into marks on paper, and I need to, every time, choose whatever marks I have at my disposal and combine them in the most effective way to create the overall visual impact that I want. We've all seen drawings, I'm sure, where objects such as trees have been drawn too intensely for where they are in the overall scene, and they stand out awkwardly. They look closer than perhaps they're meant to look, and they compete with what's meant to be the center of attention for attention. I actually think that there's far less benefit watching a single how to draw a tree video of mine than there is in watching a range of them, because it's when you watch a range of them you start to see how my thinking process looks in a range of different tree circumstances. You start to connect the fact that from what we see, there's a different way of creating marks to capture the effect, the visual effect of the reference. And it's not just drawing specimen trees. When trees start to be crowded together, there are different ways, different marks I use to capture that effect, whether the trees are far in the distance or whether they're standing at the sides, framing the scene, or leaves across the top that are very close, framing the top, or whether in fact the tree's right in the middle as the main event. It's when you see how my understanding of the drawing process works in different circumstances, different types of trees, trees placed in different parts of the scene, and how very differently I draw them in those circumstances, that you can start to understand the way I think. You can start to get insight into my process, into my understanding of what drawing is all about, and then how it looks in individual situations. It's not that learning to copy the marks in any one drawing is really going to help you, but it's learning to understand the principles that I go back to in my mind when I'm working out what marks will work best for this drawing. To be blunt, I think part of the issue is that drawing is actually much more difficult than a lot of us may have thought at the start. Maybe we had easy and early success copying cartoons as a kid, and we did it very well, and we thought that, well, I'm good at drawing and I will be good at drawing, and I just need to find out the way to do it. But in fact, when I draw, to use another way of thinking, I'm channeling my creativity through an endless number of possible channels. And I have to choose which of those channels will suit me best for this creative project. And there is no right answer, but there is an understanding of process and an awareness of what outcome I want, in this case, how I want my drawing to look, that guide me to the options I have. And then I experiment with these options over and over and over again. And this is where my, say, videos on how to draw can be helpful in showing how different it can look in different circumstances. And then you can assimilate my thinking and work it into and change it and put it upside down. But in the end, come to your own understanding of what you're trying to do when you draw, what your drawing process is, and what your drawing aim, how you want your drawings to look at the end will be. And now you will have much stronger guidance from this understanding and this visualization of the drawing at the end to make the choices as to which marks of all the possible marks that you've seen in videos that you've experimented with, you get to work out for a particular subject under particular circumstances what the best ones to choose are. So we're never left thinking, how do I draw this or that? Because the process of drawing anything is fundamentally the same. We might be more familiar with some subjects, we might have observed some subjects more closely, more intensely, and we might have more experience in creating, choosing marks for particular subjects. But in the end, it's the same whatever we draw. So the question is never, how do I draw X? The question is, how do I draw? How do I understand the drawing process? And how might it look with this subject in these circumstances? G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. I hope this has been helpful. What I really hope it will do is stop anyone watching this who thinks there is a right way from chasing the holy grail of tree drawing or face drawing or car drawing or whatever it is that you struggle with in your drawing. There is no cut and paste answer where you just have to discover where is the copy that you need to cut and paste. It's a more complex issue because it's a far more creative one than that. But in the end, I believe it's a truly more satisfying one as well. But in the end, however you understand drawing and however you do it and whatever methods you use and however your drawings look at the end, you know what I'm going to say, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.